Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me on this wonderful Thursday at the beginning of the year. I am Christina Green, generational workforce consultant with Cardigan Careers. We help organizations just like yours to retain their top talent by maximizing profits, by leveraging your multi generational team. So, thank you for joining us today. Our masterclass is going to talk about the new year and new team, flipping your generational tensions into strengths. So, truthfully, we think that generational differences often feels like conflict, right? Like like people in the teams going after one another. But we're going to uncover how to turn that tension into strength so you can retain your top talent. Okay. So, let me just share the screen here. So, let's go ahead and get into it. So, here is our agenda for today, and of course, it's so Gen X of me to have an agenda, but this is what we're going to cover. So, why generations clash, right? So, what are some of those root causes that are leading to some of that miscommunication? What is the cost of not taking action today, right? And why now is the time to dive in and start rolling up your sleeves to figure out what's going on with your team. Some generational strengths. So let's give credit where credit is due because every generation has value and has a voice that should be heard in every workplace. Actionable strategies and tools. So, what can you start to do today that's going to help you to bridge the gap between your team? And then lastly, a roadmap to retaining your top performers. So, what can you do today? What is a 30, 60, 90 day, even 6 month plan looks like so you can start to actually build your trust and respect within your team to have greater efficiencies, ultimately greater effectiveness. All right. And then, of course, I've always got some free stuff that I'm going to give you. So go ahead and hang through, and you'll have access to all of this information coming up. All right. So, who am I and why are you listening to me? Right. So, as I told you, I am Christina Green. I am the generational workforce consultant with Cardigan Careers, and I've spent over 20 years in healthcare navigating the minefields of generational conflict myself. Throughout my career, I've been the threat. I have been the rookie, and somehow I have been the wise. Each such situation has brought me a different color into that environment. And I've been helping organizations and leaders just like you to navigate their own generational tensions for years. And I've found that most are just not aware of how great of an impact their generational biases are having on the job satisfaction and their bottom line. People are not realizing the reason why they're dissatisfied with their roles is because there is conflict within their team. And that conflict is not always because people are outdated in their thinking. It's more so that they're not open to evolving, right? So I've been called the generational whisperer by a few, and I wear that badge with honor. This is work that I truly enjoy doing. And today I'm going to help you to learn how to break down your barriers and start building bridges within your teams so you can retain your best people. All right. Okay. So let's dive in. So, does tell me if this sounds familiar, right? There's miscommunication is slowing down your productivity. Your top performers are walking out the door and you just have no idea why. Your team has poor body language during meetings, folded arms, they are muted. They're not saying anything, they're not engaging. And there's little to no engagement when you get people together, either virtually or in person, right? There seems to be a wall. There seems to be a barrier to communication. You know your team has unmet needs professionally, but you're overwhelmed and of where to begin. And these battles are erupting daily about how things should be done. Now, this is just to name a few. I'm picking on these because these are the most common, right? And if you're shaking your head with any of these, then you're in the right place and you have found your people because this are challenges that I tackle every single day with my clients. All right. But so why is there so much tension? So let's start to get a closer look as to what this looks like, right? Communication styles. Right? Let's look at this from email to messaging to leveraging various tools, right? The frequency of feedback in which your team is actually looking for. This varies across the generations. And if you don't start to take heed to this is also too causing some of your challenges. So the adoption of technology. We know that over the last 20, 30 years, and even in the last 2, 3 years, there has been an introduction of an enormous amount of technology that can be leveraged in the workplace to not only improve efficiencies, but also to help proving communications. There is also to their approach to feedback. So you've got some generations who prefer annual feedback based on their performance. You have other generations who are looking for readiness, real-time feedback that is happening on a more frequent basis. Not everybody is falling in line with that view. There's authority and hierarchy. There's this thought that the structure in which corporate America essentially exists that should be followed, right? There is a pecking order for how it is that you are to move within an organization. And there's resistance to evolving the thought process around that. There's work-life balance expectations, right? We have some generations who were built there was no work-life balance. And so to ask for it seems unreasonable. And that's because of how they were raised. That's because of how they grew up, even evolved in their careers. And we have other generations who really are expecting this from their leaders. They're expecting their leaders to lean in and to tell you more, right? To give you the reason to be there and to help them to manage their mental well being within the workspace. Now, some people feel like this is crossing all kinds of barriers, but we're talking about why the generations are clashing in the workplace. And these are some reasons. Career goals and job loyalty. We have some generations who believe that you are to be loyal to an employer because either that's where you started your career, you stay there for 30 years, you earn a pension by doing a good job. That's how you get promoted. There's nothing wrong with that thinking. It doesn't apply today to today's world, right? Because we have other generations who are absolutely pushing back on that to say, listen, I shouldn't have to wait 20 or 30 years for me to be able to reach the levels that I'm certainly capable of managing now, right? So because there's a lot to be said about the experience and about the innovation and the responsibility that someone can bring to a role as opposed to just allowing time to pass and having their experience within a particular role. So these are conflicting opinions and views, and all sides actually are right because in they're rooted in the background, the foundation of the forming of their thoughts. Okay, and we're gonna get to that in a minute. So, perceptions of professionalism. There are beliefs that some generations do not take their work and their work ethic and their approach to doing work, to executing work in a professional manner. It all comes down to our foundational definition of professionalism, and that is evolving. And it's some tie it to respect, others tie it to being able to do a good job and do the work that they've been asked to do, right? Conflict resolution styles. How do people approach when things get challenging in the workplace? How are people approaching their response to that? Right. So we have some generations who will take that head on and they will have a conversation and try to squash it. They are others who will completely avoid the conversation and in some way either be passive aggressive or completely dismissive. Right. And there's everywhere in between, right? And this is all founded in the reason the forming of their foundation. Okay. Value alignment. So, what do they value most? Personally, as well as within the organization, there's a misalignment there. And that's why this is causing a challenge, right? That's why this is causing a breakdown in the information and how it is that people are actually moving through and executing their work. Excuse me. Okay. Workplace change and innovation. So the workplace has been evolving and it does every single year, practically every single moment, especially post pandemic. So I will tell you that these are just some of the challenges that are causing people to butt heads. Okay. So now, so generational friction isn't about right or wrong, it's about the perspective. Boomers, Gen X, Zennials, Millennials, and Gen Z, they all grew up in wildly different worlds, which creates this tension. But it also holds the key to our collective success. So let's explore this a bit more. In order to understand why the generations clash, you have to understand the context of their generation. Okay. So the forming of their beliefs, of their values, of what they value in the workplace. So let's use the introduction of computers as an example within their career. All right. So, looking at the boomers, we're moving from left to right. I know there's a lot of information on this slide. And this is actually something I will give you. If you send me a message, I'll shoot this right over to you. But the boomers, for example, the introduction of a personal computer, right? Prior to this, the computers used to take up an entire floor in an office building, right? They are these supercomputers that process information and require a cold environment because they are really hot. How they've managed to now move that into a space where now it's a desktop computer. And if you remember these first computers, they were huge monitors, right? The really big back and flashing cursor. So, but this was a desktop computer that was introduced, and boomers got to experience this about mid career. So they were already in their careers by the time they actually started to experience some that were bringing in the computer. Email wasn't necessarily how they were communicating with one another. It was still face to face meetings, right? Meetings in conference rooms, driving to other towns to have meetings, having lunch meetings, dinner meetings. So there's a lot of face to face interaction, and that is how they're used to doing business. Now, moving over to Gen X started to see the introduction of computers about high school. This is where we're evolving from the typing class to a word processing class, right? So you start to see and experience computers early on in their career, really in high school, preparing them for their careers where they started to use computers on a daily basis as part of their daily work. Okay. Now, Zennials, I know you ask, who are they? What are they? Essentially, they are a spike in births about 25 million, whereas Gen X was about 62 million and boomers were about 72 million. 25 million of us. I am a Zennial, right? Where we kind of bridge between the Gen X and the millennials. And Zennials, we're starting to see the introduction of computers evolving from in the college, for in home, and actively using them within college. So if anybody remembers, we used to type our papers on a typewriter, right? On a modern or electric typewriter. And then that's what we would that's how we would submit our papers. Back in college, we would now start to have the introduction of using the computers to process this information. They were present in the college library. We would access them very often, especially in libraries, public libraries. So using a computer, we were seeing this certainly in high school, but we also too were bringing this into the home. It now was more ready for us. We're walking into the workforce with having computer experience, right? Significantly. Now millennials started to see the introduction of these personal computers, and this is also to more laptops were coming in, right? Think of the Apple computers where there is no tower any longer. There is just a monitor that essentially serves as the tower as well. So everything all in one, encapsulated. They started to see this in junior high. So this became a skill that they developed early on and brought it through high school, doing all of their research paper and schoolwork on a computer, as well as stepping very nicely into the workforce, having had the experience with working with a computer. and evolving through what that computer has looked like, moving from a desktop with a tower, moving directly into just a monitor to laptops. So, very well versed in leveraging technology in that way. And then lastly, Gen X, computers are in the palm of their hand, right? This is, and we all use them every single day. Our phones are the smallest computers on the planet that we use on a daily basis. So this is to give you some context around the foundation, right? So the access to information, right? If you go back to boomers, where the access to information, maybe in college, using a research paper as an example, you would take weeks because in order to complete a research paper, you would have to check out a number of books that were about your topic. You'd have to research which books to check out. You'd have to find the card catalog and find the books and then go search for them, check them out, read the books, cite them, and a very lengthy process. So to write a research paper could take months, right, to do so and to do so well, not to mention all of the grammar and the footnoting, everything. I mean, whew, I'm triggering myself thinking about doing some of this in college. Now let's fast forward that all the way to current. And it's not just Gen Z. We have access to information instantly. I mean, instantly. The invention of the internet has brought information to our fingertips. And now, with AI tools like ChatGPT, you can find an answer to a question. And not only an answer to a question, you can put it together an entire paper, if you will, right, behind what that the answer to that question is and what that means for your business, for your work, for your for what you're studying. So the path to information is so much shorter now than it ever was. So what I am finding between the generations is that there is a lack of respect or honoring the journey that it has taken to be able to get that information, to acquire that information, right? So having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and we were talking about this very thing. And sometimes it's, when you take longer to really sit with information, do you feel like you know it better? Right. So, going back to the boomers and Gen X, where we spent more time um, putting together those papers, did we absorb that information more so today than we would if we were to, attain that information very quickly? So that is also too part of like honoring the journey to acquiring and obtaining some of this information. Okay. So now, let's get into understanding what the costs are, right? So, because let's put some data to understanding what this impact looks like for your business. So, annually, the cost to US companies for disengaged employees is $450 billion. That is with a B. A B like billion, like boy, like oh my goodness, that's a huge number, right? And that number continues to grow. In 2025, US workforce will be 75% millennials and Gen Z. And I'm going to show you some other data about what that looks like at the leadership level, okay, across the US. And turnover costs are costing US companies $1 trillion annually. So I can't even tell you how many commas, how many zeros that is. That is an insurmountable amount of information, amount of money to be spent on replacing, on attrition, on it. There's nothing that is being devoted towards retaining your staff. And so that's why I do the work I do, is because this is about leveraging your multi generational teams to ensure that you can retain them. Because $1 trillion just in the US alone on an annual basis is a high number. And that number is high because it costs anywhere from 50 to 200% of an employee's staff to replace them. Okay, we'll go into that in just a bit. And then lastly, 74% of employees feel that they're not reaching their full potential due to the poor team dynamics, right? They're not feeling bought into their team. They're not feeling that they can access their team members to be collaborative. And because of that, they feel disengaged. When your team feels disengaged, they're not bought into the work that you're doing, they're not supporting your goals, and you're ultimately not running efficiently and effective. Okay. All right. So now let's start. So I want you to take a deep breath because what I'm going to say is going to bring it all into perspective for why now is the time to act. Okay. Because the workforce is shifting. Presently, we have this is now this chart here is telling you the breakdown of leadership or executive positions across the different generations, right? So, boomers currently make up about 55% of the executive positions. Now, in moving up, now in excuse me, in 2014, they made up about 55%. Presently, they make up about 25%. Now, in 10 years' time, they are forecasted to be less than 10%, so more like 5% of the executive positions. Now, we see this with most generations as we're shifting within the workforce, right? But now take a look at Gen X. So, Gen X is currently at 50% of executive positions. Millennials are currently at 20%. Now let's look at 10 years from now. 10 years from now, Gen X is going to be moving to 30%, right? So dropping out of some of those executive positions, often because of retirement. And in the next 10 years, Gen X will be the next generation that will be retiring and exiting the workforce in droves. Now, remember, we're already losing the archived knowledge, the history, right? The experience within the boomers. We're going to start losing that with Gen X as well, right? And this is not to say that everybody retires at 65 and retirement looks the same for everyone. There are great new programs such as returnships that companies are exploring. Now, additionally, millennials are forecasted to actually be 50% of the executive roles in the US over the next 10 years. And look who's also too creeping up there, 15%. So 65% of your executives are going to be either millennials or Gen Z. Gen Z holding 15%. Now, present day, you can't see the number there, but presently, Gen Z are actually holding 5% of executive positions. Now, you can say what you want to about the size of these companies. Gen Z are stepping into owning their own businesses, being leaders within the startup space, gaining experience that is non-traditional that can be applied to your work, to your workplace. And they are doing this because we're oftentimes balking at their experience, balking at their age and feeling that they are not ready. The oldest Gen Z is 27. I remember what I was doing when I was 27, right? I had completed college, I had had my first child. I had at least I think 10 years worth of work experience. 8 of that managing national accreditation programs for 5 different health plans and doing big business. I had high responsibility and I was just 27. So do not be discouraged by the age. The age means nothing. What they are capable of. Do not put a thumb on them because they will absolutely exit the industry and start their own, right? This is an opportunity to start shepherding them in, to start welcoming them into the workplace, right? But to do so in a way that is inclusive of all generations. Okay. Now, what you also to see on this slide are some of the companies that are already taking strides in that direction. And I will tell you, these companies and others are the reasons why they are successful because they're leveraging their multi-generational teams. They are putting policies behind this. They are putting programs together that are supporting an inclusive environment towards bringing people together, bringing teams and multi generational teams together in particular. Okay, Now, I know this can feel a little discouraging, but listen, it's not all bad, right? The workforce is shifting. It, but the workforce cannot manage without balance. And that means that everyone has a place in this future, every generation. It's all a matter of what steps you take today to make that so. All right? My goal today is not to scare you with the data, right? Of the doom and gloom that is to come. It's actually quite the opposite. So, as we saw that there are countless national and global companies that are claiming control of their futures by adopting multi-generational friendly approaches. I want you to do the same, and I want you to feel confident in doing the same. I want you to be excited and motivated about the future because you can see your place in it. This is not a future that doesn't exist without you, that doesn't exist without your contribution. This is a future in which we are inclusive, we are evolving, we are open to change, right? I want you to be the voice of reason when naysayers are balking at trends that are inevitably changing. Because when we resist the change passes us. When we are part of it, we are part of that train that is moving. All right. Multi generational teams are the present and they are the future. Let's not exclude ourselves simply because we believe that there is an emphasis on trying to hire a particular generation. We are part of that conversation if we choose to fight for our seat at the table. Okay. Now, let me tell you a little bit about why I care so much, why this is a passion for me. Well, many years ago, and some of you may have heard this story before, but at the start of my career, I was the threat. I was the rookie with too many bright ideas, right? I was 22 years old and I was pregnant and I was new in my career with healthcare. I was new to this team and I was an easy target. And so I was relentlessly scrutinized and held to a higher standard and interrogated by these two women who were on my team. And I thought it was because they hated me. And I thought it was also too because I was doing something wrong and internalized much of this when I realized that actually there was a bigger purpose, another why or reason behind it. I realized it was because they couldn't get out of their own way to evolve to new ideas, new approaches. I was the threat because I represented a wave of change that they had been resisting for a very long time. Now, today, this sounds like Gen Z is so lazy and entitled. This sounds like, why do we have to do it their way? Or it's not broken, so leave it alone. Or another training on another tool. Why is everything changing so much? So, does this sound familiar? Right? These are words, these are phrases and questions that you'll hear your team start to utter when they're feeling resistant or they're feeling excluded, right? They perhaps maybe don't have all of the information. They don't know exactly what to believe. And they're feeling like they are left at the train station on a train that's moving fast without them, right? So these are opportunities to lean in for collaboration, to lean in for understanding. So now excuse me. I know we have all of our views about the generations, right? And let's just say a couple. Boomers, right? So shouldn't they be retired? It's a question I hear often. Gen X, why are they so bossy? Zennials, who? Never heard of them. Millennials, please stop making everything about a new app, right? And Gen Z, I can't even reach them. Now, I had to make these up. These are things I hear often in the work that I do because the and every single one of them represents a confusion, feeling excluded. They feel that they are not part of the future. They feel resistance because everything that is going on around them represents change. Now, and these are just stereotypes that many of us carry around with us. And while I won't say that they're entirely incorrect, because we all know that even all good jokes contain true, contain some truth. Shout out to Jake Cole there. They don't tell the whole story, right? Because you can't overgeneralize anything or anyone. So let's give credit where credit is due and explore some of the strengths of each generation. Now, I'm not going to go into all of these, right? So look at the generations in which you may have some of the biggest challenges with. And I want you to see that this is actually the low-hanging fruit. These are the things that they tend to shine. Now, these are generalizations for a generation, right? We know that there are personality traits that are going to influence every single one of them. But if you look at the baseline, if you look at the median, right? This is what you tend to find as far as strengths throughout the generations. So lean in and take an opportunity instead of seeing the glass as half empty. It is half full if you start to recognize that there is good there, right? If you are a millennial and you're having trouble managing dealing in your excuse me in your organization, perhaps maybe with boomers or with Gen X, I want you to lean forward and see where it is that they shine, right? The value of pursuing a relationship there starts by understanding the context that we discussed earlier, but also to recognizing where their strengths are and tapping them for that. Same thing, right? Gen X, I know there's a great barrier between Gen X and Gen Z, right? And a huge one. And one for another talk about how, in fact, Gen X, we're the ones who created Gen Z. We are the ones who empowered them to have that voice, to march in the street, to push back, to what we call job hop, because they're not willing to sacrifice their well being in order to meet an objective for an organization, in order to blindly follow a rule or blindly follow um, a directive from their leadership. Okay. In fact, in many ways, we should admire them for standing up for that. So that's a talk for another day. But leveraging these strengths, this is how we are able to move forward. Okay. Now, without belaboring the point, there's also two opportunities across the board. Yes, and each generation should consider some self development, right? So I'll leave this here for your perusal without going through any of this detail because I think we all can feel called out to a certain extent. We know where we have some opportunities because we all have them. So, all right, I'm going to keep moving on. So, 66% of elder employees, and forgive me because I don't enjoy that word, that's a quote. 60% of elder employees perceive generational differences as a source of workplace conflict. Okay. So you may not see it, but your team does. Your team is seeing the wedge between the generations, and the workforce is paying the price. And ultimately, your bottom line, right? We saw what those numbers, what that attrition is doing. $1 trillion annually to US companies is absurd. So, but let's get into solutions because I know that's why you're here. So, let's talk through a couple of them. This is by no means an exhaustive list. This is a place to get started, right? So you can offer some generational listening sessions. What does this look like? This is it's a way to create a safe space, right? For employees to be able to express their challenges, their expectations, their wins, their ideas, right? I think Steve Jobs said that the best idea should win, right? Or the best idea must win. And that doesn't matter what level it's coming from, what generation, what voice is bringing the idea. When you start to break down the generational barriers, you give people the opportunity to start to be authentic, to show up as their authentic self. And trust me, you don't want to stifle that creativity. That is where the future of the work that you do, that's where the success lies, right? And listening to them. So this is organized, facilitated. I would say facilitated by a neutral party. Don't make this, coming off the heels of a bad employee engagement survey, right? Don't make this in response to some you maybe a group of people who've been, breaking the rules. No, this is an opportunity to lean in and be proactive, right? So you can do anonymous surveys, but to be honest, those are not always helpful, and no one ever believes that they're anonymous, so doing so is not helpful. Where you can start to collect a lot of this data is by having you have to actually foster uh, this mutual respect, this psychological safety. It has to be a safe environment for people to feel that they can actually express their ideas. Don't necessarily lead with just asking them for the bad or for the feedback. You want to collect their ideas. You want to understand what is the lens that they are viewing and approaching the work that you do collectively, right? So this is not intended to be a town hall of just, complaints. This is meant to be constructive, right? So this works because you're building empathy and understanding. People are talking who may have not been communicating before. You are able to highlight their individual and collective goals and their values and start drawing alignments there, right? Encouraging proactive problem solving by bringing your teams together instead of just having a meeting. This is really a forum that is going to support the continued growth and development of your team. And I will tell you this, you might as well not do this at all if you have no intention of following through and you have no plan to do so, right? So we can lead with our best intentions, but if we have no idea on how we're going to execute, you might as well not ask because that actually will do more damage than anything else, right? Lastly, to mention some early adopters of this, Intel is having focus groups for inclusion within their teams. Cisco is offering cross-generational discussions. So this is happening already, and those who are already adopting this type of approach in the workplace are finding greater engagement within their teams, and greater engagement means greater profits for the organization, but overall job satisfaction and more employee loyalty. Okay, let's keep going. All right. Let's see here. So now, excuse me. Now I know that you're going to say, I don't have time to tailor my communication for my boss, let alone my team. And I can certainly understand that, right? Well, guess what? Your team is suffering if you are not taking if your team is suffering if you are taking a one size fits all approach because they are not the same. And if you are a parent, especially a parent of multiple children, or an aunt, an uncle, or anyone in their life, if you've ever seen children play at a playground, you know what I'm talking about. You know that kids are not all the same, and that you cannot handle each of them the same way, right? Just like your bosses have never been the same. Everybody on your team is not necessarily the same. So why would you ever think that you could do the same with your team and expect excellence? Doesn't make a lot of sense. So, tailoring your communication does not mean going out of your way, right? It doesn't, you're not a short order cook that's going to provide 5 different meals every single day. No, it's just about understanding what communication is driving effectiveness within your team. And likely you only need to implement maybe one or two, or sorry, 2 or 3 different potential communication variances. Some of it has to do with the frequency that you're providing it, others have to do with the method, right? So it's finding a good blend that works for you. It's also to establishing guidelines around what communication looks like, how it flows within your team. You can have very quick messages across the team that everyone agrees. You'll use your messaging system. Maybe it's Slack, maybe it's Teams, maybe it's something else, right? You leverage for more formal communication, like meeting recaps, and because in Gen X, right, we're really big on that, meeting recaps or just understanding the complexity of a particular topic. Maybe emails will be leveraged for that, right? Perhaps maybe you can record something. I'm a big fan of Loom. I work with global teams, and so it makes sense to record a Loom to explain something that others can watch at a later time. Because it's not about the time they're available, it's about being able to share the information, right? And so when you start to leverage these different tools, and approach it a little differently, this is how you start to speak into the listening of your team, right? And they will appreciate it. Give them the opportunity to actually help define and shape what this looks like. You can formalize this and actually put it into a team guideline. This or some team bylaws, whatever you want to call it. But this is how you can leverage, getting feedback from your team and turning that into a tailored communication guide, one that you all agree on. Okay. So this works because it reduces the friction that's caused by this mismatch communication, right? How many times do you hear, I can't ever reach them? Well, maybe they're not available by phone. Maybe they are an introvert and they don't like to receive phone calls. That's how I am. Send me a text message, send me an email because it's I'll say this because you want to be able to have some control over your time, right? And it's nothing personal against the person. It has everything to do with your communication preferences. When you lean in here, you start to understand a bit more and realize that this is not personal. This is just around preference. Okay. Early adopters listed there Microsoft and Pricewaterhouse Chase. All right. Let's keep going. Got some more content to get through. All right. Celebrate success differently. So you'll know this, and especially, sorry, just as we all communicate differently, we also seek recognition in different ways, right? While there are guidelines for each generation, where there are personality traits that are going to influence this entirely, the best thing to do is to ask, right? To ask your team, how do you like to be recognized? That is one of the most I'll say, inviting questions that you can ask your team because you're asking them to tell them not only a little bit about themselves, but you're also to allowing them to weigh in on something. You never know. I mean, it sounds like a dumb question, perhaps, but that's because you may be assuming that everyone wants a handshake from the CEO at the town hall or to be called out during a meeting or to have their name broadcasted across the department for doing a great job. That does not work for everybody, right? And in fact, that can get under the skin of certainly some of your best talent simply by not knowing. It's kind of the equivalent in a relationship to not knowing the love language of your partner, right? Don't make that mistake, right? Some prefer a one-on-one acknowledgement or maybe a small celebratory memento. You will never know this unless you ask this question. So you won't know until you ask. And if you don't ask and you get it wrong, the damage is catastrophic. So think buying your wife a blender for her birthday. Yeah, kind of that level, right? Okay. So so generally speaking across generations, boomers, Gen X, and I'll say that I love this, Plex, and something that kind of marks a milestone, something that's important to them, right? But something like that is not going to work for maybe millennials and Gen Z. But yet again, you will not know until you ask. Okay, I belabored that point, so now we're going to keep moving. Now let's get into so how do you get there? Right? So this is a suggestion of a roadmap to success, right? Excuse me. So over the next 4 to 6 months, how do you start taking some action and moving in this direction? Where do you start? Where do you start to, build some steam, right? So it starts with an assessment. Understand your team, right? And when I say to assess your team dynamics or to assess your generations that they're attached to, this is in no way intended to use it as a lever for discrimination or segregation. This is meant to be information as a tool to help you to have greater insights into understanding them a bit more. That's all this is, right? Hosting those generational listening sessions, as we mentioned, maybe establishing some tailored communication as we walked through, implementing some cross-generational mentorships. We seem to think that mentorships is always someone who is older who is mentoring someone younger. Guess what? It actually works both ways. It's like the telephone, okay? So information can be exchanged both ways. There's value between both directions, bidirectional mentorship, right? Opening up and building a feedback loop. Allow information to flow, right? Ideas, challenges, concepts, anything. Open up this channel so people can start to flow in their ideas and also to share more real time when things are maybe not going according to plan. Your teams have a better sense about why things are not working. So, keeping this line of communication open is going to be so beneficial to you. And then lastly, celebrate wins and recognize contributions. Now that you know how it is that your team likes to be celebrated, use that to start to infuse to be intentional about how it is that you are celebrating within your team. Okay. So, and leverage this on a grand scale that makes sense for your team and for the activities that are taking place. Now, in closing, the most important steps, right, are to two things. One, to commit to the process because it might take time to unveil the root causes of the friction, right? This is not always going to come out easily. You're going to have to dig a little bit and understand, lean in with your intentions, lean in with your authenticity, with your curiosity. That's how you're going to understand this better. And then lastly, take action with your information. This builds trust with your team, and that takes time. Trust is not something that is earned overnight. The root of your success is in the cultivating of the trust and the building of space, and building a space of psychological safety. That is only possible when you seek to understand them better. Okay. Now imagine if you could get everyone pulling in the same direction. Maybe get everyone singing the same song. You maybe transform your conflicts into collaboration. Have an energized team that tackles challenges together. This is not impossible. It is just requires intentional and genuine action on your part as their leader. And what if your team felt respected and safe with you as their leader because you've been the source of that transformation? You have been the guide that has helped them to get to a level of satisfaction within their roles. You've earned their trust because you gave them yours as well. Now, this is the sweet spot for leaders. This is where growth accelerates. This is the making of your legacy as a leader. Think Mel Gibson in Braveheart. That's the level that you can reach when you seek to understand your team and you start building and cultivating this relationship and a culture around them that takes their voice and their preferences into consideration. And you could have all of this without dealing with the frustrations of the delays, all of the challenges you are going through today, without spending loads of cash on staff turnover, $1 trillion in the US alone on an annual basis, tanking your team morale because that is that is like pee in the pool. You cannot change it, right? Passive or and also too without that passive aggressive battles that keep waging within your team and burnout that's caused by you having to lean in and overcompensate and even get to the level of micromanagement. Now listen, it's not a utopia. This place is real and it can be your reality. But we're all human and we need data to make these decisions. right? So here we go again. And if these numbers don't strike you as WTF, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, then I don't know what to say. Okay. So once again, $450 billion in the US companies alone, and that's the low number just for disengaged employees, right? 21% engaged teams are 21% more profitable. I don't know about you, but I'd rather have 21% more profit in my pocket than have to spend this next number of 200% is what is spent on turnover of disengaged employees. That's what it costs companies on an annual basis. 41% engagement employees exhibit 41% lower absenteeism. That means fewer times calling in sick, right? Fewer times not showing up for meetings, or perhaps maybe being present but not present, right? So these are the numbers that essentially are driving the reason why this is the time to start taking action. So now, and if any of this has struck a nerve or perhaps maybe rang a bell for you, then it's time to chat because this problem is not going away. And in fact, it's actually only getting worse and has only been getting worse over time. And I don't want that for you, and I certainly don't want that for your team. So let's chat and fix this together. Use this QR code that's on the screen and yeah, get on my calendar because it's time to start to take this journey together, right? What we do on this consultation is we're going to go through how to become clear about what some of your most challenging moments are within your team. How do we now deep dive into what those dynamics that are impacting those challenges? How do we I'll teach you some actionable strategies that you can start to put into place to help support you taking action. And then lastly, have a roadmap to success. So how do you step outside of the present moment and start to put together a plan that can make you successful over time? Thank you so much for your time. And as a thank you, I want to offer a toolkit to get you started, a toolkit that includes a generational engagement assessment tool. So, if you're not sure whether or not this is an issue that you're experiencing on your team, there's an assessment that you can do to start to see whether or not any of these issues are coming up. The roadmap for success. So, much like what we covered today, what does this look like for you? So, just a screenshot, a cheat sheet that's going to help you with understanding what steps to take now, right? What steps to take next. And then next, a cheat sheet around the generations, right? So, what I showed you today, some of their strengths, some of their opportunities, maybe that context, what they value, their communication preferences. This is all information I'm going to provide you. There is a QR code on the screen here. That is directly to my profile. Send me a message, right? DM me and let me know, hey, I attended this training and I would really like to have those materials. So go ahead and use that QR code to contact me to send me a message to claim these freebies. Thank you. That's all for today. And thank you very much for your time and your attention. Once again, I'm Christina Green, and it has been an honor to present to you today. I look forward to connecting with you, and I'll see you next time.